So good evening, Mayor and Council. Actually, we're going to
Spence.
be sharing the staff report duties this evening. I'm Paul Spence. I'm your Community Development Director. Steve Stewart, our Planning Manager, and Jason Alcala, our City Attorney, will also be sharing portions of this presentation for you this evening. So, as you mentioned, at a January 13th City Council meeting, the Council did ask staff to provide information back on the referendum against approving the development agreement for the Wine Country Hotel at the Bankhead. And Council specifically asked us to take a look at 4 different issues. The first was information on demand for new hotel rooms and commercial square footage in the downtown. Second is information on how parking levels will be maintained during construction of the city's downtown plan and how soon the northwest corner of the Livermore Village site can be developed. Third was comparative information on timing of implementation of the city's approved downtown plan and implementation of the initiative. And then the fourth was a description of Assembly Bill 1486 and its potential effects. So to start off with, we're going to take a look at the first question. The work conducted by PlaceWorks and their subconsultants for the Downtown Steering Committee in 2017 included an analysis of market demand for various types of land uses in the downtown, including retail uses and a new hotel. Commercial and hotel experts were brought in by the steering committee to those meetings to present the information. Key learnings were developed and agreed upon by the steering committee members for the evaluation of different alternatives. And one of those key learnings was around commercial retail demand, and another was around hotels. So with demand generated by new housing and a new hotel in the downtown, the maximum retail demand was calculated to be an additional 10 to 20,000 square feet. The city plan proposes about 10,000 square feet of new retail and restaurant uses, which is consistent with the key learnings. And the initiative proposes up to 30,000 square feet, which exceeds the maximum recommended retail square footage. So that is the retail comparison. For the hotel, the steering committee again brought in key experts, and there was a report summarizing the evaluation there, and I've provided a page from the report here for you this evening. This was the key learnings on the hotel. As highlighted on the screen, market demand for a downtown hotel is in the range of 100 to 135 rooms. The approved city plan includes a 135-room hotel, which is at the upper end of that room count. The initiative increases the capacity permitted to 160 rooms, which is larger than the recommended maximum number. Key learnings also highlighted that a hotel should have strong connectivity to shops and restaurants in the Bankhead Theater and should front onto South Livermore Avenue. Hotel experts noted that this location is important to attract a viable hotel and for long-term hotel success.
So these were the experts that came in with the key learnings. And I'm not sure if you got it later on in your slides, but we had a lot of public outreach in addition to the experts coming together. And Dr. Carling is the one that chaired that, and Dr. Warner as well co-chaired that. And we heard from a lot of the members of the community.
Right.
And this is a fact that that this narrative has sort of changed over the last 3 years now. But what was the percentage of the public that we heard from that articulated, that agreed that the hotel should front on South Livermore Avenue?
I believe that number is around 78%.
78%?
Yes.
Okay, so 78% agreed that left side or right side, that the hotel needed to face South Livermore Avenue. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so not east of L, but actually it had to be on South Livermore Avenue. And that was the major agreement.
Right. The other thing to remember is that the steering committee members all agreed upon the key learnings and agreed that they would be published and disseminated to the public.
That was the 19-member committee.
That's the 19-member
And they all agreed that the hotel had to front on South Livermore Avenue. Again, disagreement whether it was east or west side, but that everybody agreed that it had to be on South Livermore Avenue.
That was the key learning, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just want to make that clear.
Right. So the city's proposed hotel does front onto South Livermore Avenue, and it does meet that criteria. The 9212 report notes, which was an analysis of the initiative itself, so the 9212 report notes that a larger hotel located on Railroad Avenue, as proposed by the initiative, would be less likely to secure development capital, and maintain healthy operations, and would be more likely to require public subsidy. Another key area that we looked at was parking. And staff collected ranking worksheets from the public at our workshops, our pop-ups, our community events. And parking was the top priority identified through this community ranking process. The downtown hotel was ranked number 5, and the location of the hotel was ranked number 7 out of 10 categories. So based on that community interest in parking, the council asked us, as the council selected the downtown plan and began to implement, to make sure that the pre-existing parking supply was maintained throughout the construction process. And so the slide on the screen for you this evening shows the pre-existing parking supply. Before we began construction, before we began any implementation, we had 565 spaces on the 2 major areas that make up the downtown project. So 502 spaces on the large former Lucky's site, 63 spaces on the smaller city lot that's on the east side of Livermore Avenue there. Early work on the downtown project included regrading and reorganizing the parking on the northern portion of this central block. Again, to orient you, Livermore Avenue Railroad, this is the large block, this is the smaller block next to the bankhead. So as we worked through this process, we improved the efficiency of the parking. We also took down some of the buildings. The former KFC and the Domino's were taken down, and additional parking was provided in this area. The railroad depot was relocated. More recently, Speedy Lube was taken down, and additional parking was provided here. So as we've gone through phases of construction, the city staff has worked consistent with council direction to maintain that minimum of 565 spaces throughout the process. Currently, even though Stockman's Park is under construction, there are still 567 parking spaces available in this downtown area here. The construction of the I Street Garage does not remove any existing parking, and it's scheduled to go underway mid to late spring of this year and take about a year to complete. The demolition of the Byerly building here will free up some additional parking, and Stockman's Park will be completed late spring, early summer, and will free up some additional parking. So all of these phases are well mapped out, and they're working together to maintain that parking supply. Under the downtown plan, the East Side Hotel, which will eventually be developed here, does not require completion of the I Street Garage in order to begin construction. So,
could you repeat that? I think some people have missed that in previous council meetings. So could you say that again?
Sure. The construction of the hotel on this site here does not require the completion of the I Street Garage in order to begin its construction.
So I hope everyone in the audience and listening, it's a key point. It's one of the pieces of misinformation that had been out there that I think we're trying to correct tonight.
In this parking phasing plan, however, the L Street Garage does need to be constructed here in order for this northwest quadrant of the site to be developed. If the northern portion of the site were to be developed first for any use, such as a hotel or housing or anything else, the removal of parking in this area would result in a shortfall of about 164 spaces. And that assumes that the I Street Garage is already done. So you would have a shortfall of about 164 spaces here if you didn't have a garage here and you just developed this northwest quadrant. But then you'd have an additional problem, because you'd have something here, and then when you went to build your L Street Garage, you wouldn't have any additional parking supply to offset that. So the problem would get worse. If you built this first and then built the L Street Garage second, your deficit would balloon to 323 spaces.
So just to emphasize that, very clearly. I hope everyone is out there, because there's another piece of misinformation that was out there. It's what was just stated. You cannot build something in the northwest corner and maintain the parking requirement without the L Street garage being built first. Therefore, there is no way to build something over there at the same schedule as on the east side.
Right. And actually, I'm going to pass this over to Mr. Stewart now, who's going to talk about schedule, among other things.
Thanks, Paul. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. So to talk a little bit about schedule and timing, the implementation of the city's downtown plan began in early 2018 with the remediation of some contaminated soils and also the installation of temporary parking, where you saw the diagram a few slides ago. You know, Veterans Way is now complete and Stockman's Park's under construction. That's what's going on behind the green construction fencing down on the site now. And then you're also aware there's a number of agreements that are already in place to implement the city's approved downtown plan, including disposition and development agreements and a development agreement with Presidio for the hotel, an agreement with the Stockmans for the downtown park in exchange for housing down here on the end of Pacific Housing, about 140 units for affordable housing units for veterans and or seniors. And then also an easement was granted in favor of the Stockmans over the downtown park and surrounding uses to ensure compatibility with the park and that the city meets its obligations to construct the park with the Stockmans. Some other agreements in place are disposition and development agreements with Red Bear for the commercial properties around, which will be an expansion of Blacksmith Square. Disposition, development, and loan agreement with Eden Housing, which has the loan component, which was $500,000 from the city's affordable housing fund for some of the pre-entitlement work necessary to get that application going. And then exclusive negotiating rights agreements with our cultural stakeholders, which is Quest for the Livermore Science and Society Center and Shakespeare Associates for development of the Black Box Theater. The Planning Commission and City Council have also looked at a number of land use entitlement applications for the components down there, including a couple rounds of specific plan amendments to implement that plan. The downtown design review for both the parking garages, the I Street garage and the L Street garage. The downtown design review and design standards for the landscaped areas and public areas around Stockman's Park, and then the actual specific design review for Stockman's Park itself. So this,
just 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the sequence, again, I want to emphasize this. We said you can't develop the northwest corner without the L Street garage, and you can't do the L Street garage without the I Street garage.
correct.
Just want to make sure everyone here understands that. Thank you.
Sure. And so up on the screen now is a calendar or sequence of construction time periods for those major components. And this assumes no delays by a referendum in March and no delays by an initiative in November. And as I mentioned, Veterans Way is complete. Stockman's Park's under construction. We anticipate having that done later this summer. Next in line is the I Street parking garage, which would commence this spring, take about a year to construct, and have that in place by spring of 2021. Then that follows with the commercial and hotel, which would start in the fall of 2020 of this year, and then be done commercial fall of 2021, the hotel the summer of 2022. And then as we've been discussing, the L Street parking garage would start in the fall of 2021 and also take about a year to construct and be done in fall of 2022. That clears the way for the rest of the uses on the site, the cultural, the housing, and Veterans Park to be completed by 2025. And
Got one other question here.
sure.
That timing on the L Street garage presumes that it is as designed.
That's correct.
So if for some reason in the November, after November timeframe, there was a desire to redesign that L Street garage, that timeframe just got shifted out majorly, right? Several years.
Yes, it would.
So just want to make sure everybody understands this timeline here is assuming we don't have to redesign the L Street garage. But if we did for some reason, then any development in the northwest corner is pushed out many years.
Yes.
And then just wanted to highlight as well what Councilmember Carling brought up in our Assistant Community Development Director, Eric Uranga, that the city did get awarded a grant in the amount of $14 million to go towards the 130-unit project on the northwest corner of this site. And that's as part of the city's approved plan. If the initiative does pass in November 2020, then the city would essentially restart the development process to create a new project description, a new site plan with certainty regarding location, size, scale, design, and feasibility of the development components. So the initiative does allow a variety of land use options on multiple parcels or districts. Here on the map or on the screen, you'll see the initiative plan divided up into the various zoning districts of the specific plan, where the text in the initiative language then identifies what uses could go in each of those districts. And one thing that's fixed is the housing shown here in the middle of the site, separated from the First Street businesses by a surface parking lot. So, for example, the site...
I have another question.
Sure.
What's shown there in the initiative in that housing south of Veterans Way, where the city plan has parking, which I believe was the number one priority? That number one priority parking behind the First Street businesses in this initiative, if I understand you correctly, is being replaced with the last priority housing in that section that you just indicated.
That's correct, in District 2.
So just repeat that. The initiative replaces the number one priority parking, convenient to First Street, with the last priority high triple density housing.
If I may ask, housing in that location, what does that do to Veterans Way?
In this diagram, it's shown as in the same location. It may require some location of utilities and some landscaping.
So we'd have to do some more work on a completed street?
Correct.
Okay,
That's
so
correct.
the street's incomplete, we'd have to do something different with it then.
Yes.
Wow.
And the other question I wanted to point out, that sub-district you have there, the middle green one in the north, just above that, it looks like it's encroaching on the Stockman's Park easement. So they're going into the Stockman's Park easement with this initiative. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I wanted to speak to just go back for a second to the work that was done by the steering committee and with the experts who brought in, and just differentiate that from opinion. There were several different pieces to this process. One was bringing in the experts. So if we go back to the key learnings from the on the retail uses and the hotel key learnings on the downtown hotel, those were gathered from people whose job it is, who are trained in making these things happen, some of them who make their living doing it, some of whom study it, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. That is as distinct from the outreach process, which looked at 10 different areas and gathered opinions, preferences from citizens as to how they wanted their community to be, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Two of those were finances and housing. Those ended up being numbers 9 and 10, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's correct.
I think it would be very difficult to say that anybody would believe that finances should be number 9. So there, you know, well, so therefore something's going on with the, and I don't believe that the people who filled this out really were thinking that, oh golly, I don't care about finances. My guess is it was more like, finances are important, but that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about something else. Similarly, I just want to be clear with the housing. We're in a situation where we're talking about affordable housing. We're talking about problems with housing. So the fact that those were number 10 may speak to the issues of individuals, but perhaps not the issues for the city as a whole. I would hate to think that in this city, really, housing was number 10 for really we didn't care about it to that degree. I am concerned about that. With that in mind, the initiative plan, I believe, or the initiative, the zoning concept thing, takes the idea of affordable housing and removes affordable housing. Is that correct?
It's not clearly defined. I will say that the size of the units is about 550 square feet per unit, studio and 1-bedroom units, which typically don't have the variety of bedroom mixes and product is typically more competitive for affordable housing financing. And we do have a disposition and development agreement and loan agreement with Eden Housing, a reputable affordable housing builder.
The other thing, sorry, just to mention, the $14 million grant had been mentioned earlier. That is only for the Eden project. If the project were changed, that money would not necessarily flow to any other housing project.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that was clear to everybody. The $14 million that Eden Housing proposed on was for studio 1, 2, 3 bedroom affordable housing.
Yes.
In that location.
Right.
And that would not be applied to housing in this particular
Correct.
drawing.
Right.
And the sizes of those units, as Mr. Stewart pointed out, it was around 500 square feet for the initiative. But what Eden Housing is proposing, I think the average size was 770 square feet, but it was actually labeled as multifamily housing, which I believe went up to 1,200 square feet for the 3 bedrooms. What I think is interesting to note is in the drawings for the initiative, those 500 square foot units were labeled as multifamily housing. And I don't see how you're going to put a family into basically a 2-car garage.
And I'd like to find out too, to make sure if non-affordable, if that $14 million isn't used as designated, what is our next step with that?
That goes back to the county
Okay.
if we can't.
City pays it back?
Do you mean the grant that we're
Yes.
talking about? Okay, so the grant is applied to that specific project. We don't see it on the screen here, but the city's approved plan that Eden Housing put in for. If Eden is unable to move forward with that project, that money would go back into the county pool and would go to another jurisdiction.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so just back to the illustrative concept here, and that different uses can go in different locations. An example of that is on the east side of Livermore Avenue in District 2.44. What's depicted in the diagram is a parking structure with some commercial here, and then either on the rooftop or a ground floor there. That district also allows a black box theater or a science and society center with a conditional use permit. A black box theater is also allowed up in District 2.45, and that's shown on the diagram here. It's also allowed in District 2.48, and so it's allowed in a number of locations, which sort of emphasize the need for public dialogue on where those uses should go, how big they should be, what they should look like, and how they should interact.
So can I just elaborate on that? So what you're saying is that the initiative is really not specific about what could be, right? So therefore, we'd have to do outreach because we don't really know what's being voted on in particular for a particular plan.
That's correct. It's only specific on the housing
But
location.
but there are two specific things that the initiative does. One is it precludes housing where we have the deal with Eden Housing where we get that money from the county, right?
Yes.
So it stops that, it cuts out that possibility. And the other thing it does, even though it's got lots of variation, the other thing it very clearly does is almost allow anything but a hotel where it's always been planned.
That's correct.
Right. So that's what's going on. We have uncertainty as to what would get built, wide variety in the sizes of things, but two specific things: kill the housing deal that we've got, kill the hotel.
Yes.
And then so just looking a little closer at the initiative concept and some of the provisions within that. So here the footprint of the Science and Society Center is about 6,000 square feet. The initiative text allows a black box theater or a science center at this location up to 30,000 square feet in size. Shakespeare Association's proposing about a 15,000 square foot black box theater, and the Quest Science Center is proposing about a 20,000 square foot building. And so just to give an idea of what some of those sizes look like, we've superimposed some of those sizes on this plan. So this box represents a 15,000 square foot footprint in that district, overlaying over the initiatives building. The next box is a 30,000 square foot either black box theater or a Science and Society Center. That size could change depending if there's a mezzanine or another story.
So that actually goes into what they propose as a hotel. It actually extends that building, actually goes into where their hotel is, and obliterates that continuous park that we keep hearing about. It takes that away. So when we keep hearing compare and decide, that takes out the park. There's no continuous connection to L Street, which this community keeps being told over and over again is what they want. But according to the initiative, that goes away.
That's correct.
So can I build on that? So if you actually intended to have your drawing represent your initiative, you would have had your initiative sizes much less. So I'm personally led to believe that this drawing compared to the initiative is, the term I use is bait and switch.
A couple more examples to look at. This shows a 30,000 square foot footprint for a black box theater, overlaying over the about 10,000, a little over 10,000 square foot footprint shown in the initiative plan, about 10,500 square feet footprint that is. And then the initiative also shows a small soccer field here. It's about 50 feet wide by 100 feet long.
It's quite a bit smaller than a soccer field.
It is quite smaller, and I did.
But that's definitely a soccer field because you can see the goal boxes.
Right. So I did some work on both the Granada and Livermore High School soccer fields. Are a bit smaller than a full-size professional dimension, but they're both 195 feet wide by 360 feet long. And so, really what we've talked about is all these shapes and how they fit on there, just emphasize the need for community dialogue, how that would need to occur if the initiative passes, and we kind of start from scratch on these.
So it's not only community dialogue if the initiative passes. I think, frankly, the community should pay real close attention to this reality of what's in the initiative versus what's the rhetoric of the diagram.
Well, when people are being told compare and decide, this is quite remarkable because the Black Box Theater takes out about a third of Stockman Park, the grass area of Stockman Park. So what they've been shown, from what you're saying, that does not at all match what's in the initiative. That it's a fantasy compared to the drawing, because I think this is remarkable. The 6,000 square foot Quest building, and seeing what is proposed in the initiative is 5 times larger than that, and it obliterates what people have been told is a continuous park. So again, compare and decide the truth of what they've compared to what they've actually seen in the diagrams.
Right, and when they say compare and decide, they say, well, look at my drawing versus the other drawing. They don't say, look at what I'm really going to do versus what, the language.
The scale doesn't match at all.
Well, I think this is incredibly important for the people of this community to understand what's being sold here with misleading diagrams.
Councilmember Cooper.
Much more comfortable with the city's plan because I think that the Black Box Theater and the Quest Center should have equal access to Livermore Avenue. I think that was the whole point of putting them there. You put one over on L Street and it may get lost, and who's going to wander over that way through a soccer field and things to get there? But I like its proximity to Stockman's Park and Livermore Avenue, so we can have some more chance at making them successful. That's the most important piece.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
So on to the timing part of that. So again, if we were to follow a process similar to the other attempts to develop the site back in 2012, 2015, and 2017, then we'd go through the steps you'll see on the screen there, and I'll just try and summarize those real quickly. Again, it would be difficult to commence with any development before the City Council establishes goals and priorities, much like you did before we kicked off the public engagement in 2017. That would occur next sort of winter, where you would also talk about the budget for the fiscal years 2021, 22, and
so we're talking about next February.
Yes.
Before anything could start.
Right.
Okay.
And then following that, we would look to engage and look to get community engagement to figure out what the community wants in terms of what would be allowed in the initiative. Prepare new technical analyses to ensure feasibility and traffic flows, roadway improvements, infrastructure needed, and long-term maintenance costs. Council would select a plan, and we're having that in 1 month, which is an aggressive time frame. And then we prepare RFPs to seek development partners, since some of the existing partners may not want to continue. Circulate the RFP, provide public review of the proposals, enter into agreements like we do have already with the stakeholders. Those stakeholders would need to prepare their plans, much like at least cultural and hotel have already done. And then the Planning Commission Council will need to see those again and approve those entitlements. Prepare construction drawings for those, prepare and circulate the bid documents for the public parking structures. Construct the new L Street parking structure and the structure next to the bankhead. And that would be, those two garages would be necessary to start anything on the Livermore Village lot. And so in total, all of those steps is about to take more than 4 years to get to the start of construction. That's on the larger city-owned site. And assuming the process begins in the spring of 2021, that would result in construction of the hotel beginning in the spring of 2025, compared to the fall of 2020 under the city plan. And that this all assumes that the new plan would not be delayed by more referendums and initiatives.
There's a couple of other assumptions there,
Sure.
which I think you're about to get into. It also assumes that the state laws that have been enacted at the beginning of this year, it ignores their existence and the potential legal battles that we're going to get into. But this schedule is just for the physical part of deciding what to do. It's a whole other world that we're about to get into with respect to the legal. And I would just want to say is that this physical schedule could very well be delayed until the legal issues are resolved.
That's correct.
So they don't happen in parallel. This doesn't start until after we've got clarity legally.
That's right. And that's a perfect segue to get into your city attorney, Mr. Alcala, who will look at some of the recent legislation.
Good evening. In our last council meeting, the City Council asked for specific information on the Assembly Bill 1486 that went into effect on January 1st of this year. At that meeting, I gave a brief overview. There is a comprehensive analysis of this bill on my webpage and my city attorney reports. Just to summarize, this bill expands the surplus property requirements for cities. There are actually two separate legislative schemes that exist out there. One where the city can declare property surplus if it's no longer necessary for its use. There's a second one that says the city can declare it surplus if it is in excess of its foreseeable needs. This bill combines those two and requires a single report to now be sent to the California Department of Housing and Community Development, along with the city's housing element for its general plan. And the understanding would be that the HCD would then review that surplus property analysis as part of the housing element review to make sure the city is meeting its reasonable housing needs assessment, its RENA numbers. It does retain prior law that says if you don't comply with the requirements for your housing element, penalties can be implemented. But more importantly, for our situation, is that this bill does create an exemption for certain projects that we should say are in the pipeline. If you had an agreement that it was in existence and signed prior to September 30th of last year, they've allowed you to continue completion of that with two caveats. One, you have the agreement. And two, that project is completed by the end of disposition, is completed by the end of 2022. There's a second part of that bill that creates another exemption for property that was listed in your long-range property management plan.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
On the first, just want to make sure I have the right understanding with respect to everything in the city's approved plan. We comply with that first exemption.
That is correct. You have agreements with your partners.
So we have no issues with the approved plan and Assembly Bill 1486.
The agreements the city has with its partners for the Science and Society Center, the Blacksmith Square expansion, the Wine Country Hotel at the Bankhead, and the housing project with Eden Housing, all of those agreements would allow the city to avail itself of this exemption. Yes. There's a second exemption that looks to the dissolution of the former RDA and the Livermore Successor Agency's long-range property management plan that was approved by both the Oversight Board, the Livermore Successor Agency, and ultimately the Department of Finance. That exemption says that if the long-range property management plan identified a particular property for future development, the city can continue to pursue that future development if it gets into an agreement by the end of this year, and again, finally completes that disposition before the end of 2022. That's another exemption that would apply to the hotel. So the hotel actually has two exemptions that would apply to it to avoid the application of 1486. Failing those, or if those projects do not lead to completion and disposition, AB 1486 would be implemented against those properties in their disposition.
So I have another couple of questions related to this, if I may.
Excuse me?
I have another question relating to this because in Section 13 of 1486, you just talked about the long-range property plan. But what Section 13 says, and I would hope that Tamara Royce and others are listening carefully, is that it says, with respect to land held in the Community Redevelopment Property Trust Fund or in the Long Range Plan. So I want to pursue that. So with respect to the northwest corner where we currently have housing in the Long Range Plan, and we do not have a hotel in the Long Range Plan, but the one exemption that people might want to hang their hat on is, is it held in the Community Redevelopment Property Trust Fund? So the question is, for that northwest corner, is that property held in the Community Redevelopment Trust Fund?
My understanding is that it is not. That property was transferred to the city as a housing asset, as the housing successor to the former RDA.
Okay, so understand the answer. That property is not in the Community Redevelopment Trust Fund, and it is in a housing fund. Second point is the if I get this right, but is the property in the Long Range Property Management Plan in the northwest corner, is it offered for sale or future development?
No, it was identified in context with the Long Range Property Management Plan, acknowledging it was designated as a housing asset and transferred to the city.
Okay. So it's not designated for sale or future development, such as for a hotel, and it is a housing asset.
That is correct.
So, just to summarize, if anybody's going to go into Section 13 of 1486 and talk about exemptions, I want to make it clear that they do not apply to the northwest corner in any way so that you could go to a hotel there.
Very good. So if there are no further questions, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Spence.
And I will just say that concludes staff's presentation. Be happy to answer any additional questions that you may have. Thank you.